Why are so many people gripped by ideology? How are we to know whether or not our beliefs correspond to a harmful ideology? And perhaps more fundamentally, how are we to know whether our knowledge is reflective of reality? How are we to know what we know is true? These questions are very pertinent to our times, to all times in fact. And given my lack of a reputation or standing, you might be thinking that I have no right to speak on such questions, and that my decision to do so is rather presumptuous. Despite this being true, I wish to give my perspective in this video anyways, and the reason for that is analogous to that reason for which I created this channel. That being, if my younger self was watching this video, he would benefit from it. And it is not unreasonable to assume that there are people out there who are similar to who I was in the past, who are similar to my younger self, and who would therefore also benefit from this video. And so with that in mind, I'm going to discuss my standpoint in relation to these three questions, a standpoint that I believe has benefited me. If such a discussion sounds interesting or valuable to you, then I suppose you could keep watching. If not, I wish you all the best. So, I'm going to address the last question, the third question which I posed first, because as I said, it's more fundamental. And if I address the most fundamental question first, I can then apply what I've discussed in relation to that question to the other questions. So I think it makes more sense to address this question first. So, how can we know whether or not our knowledge is the truth and reflective of reality? Well, we do not know that, and we cannot know that, and we will not know that. Rather than searching for an answer to this question, rather than trying to establish whether or not our knowledge is absolute, whether or not we are in possession of some absolute truth, we need to look for the solution to this question in accepting the fact that there is always going to be doubt, and that if one thing is for sure, you can never be sure. We mustn't fall into the trap of believing that we cannot know anything, however, whilst realizing that the full and true nature of things will never be within our grasp is an indispensable part of the quest for truth. The presupposition that the universe is intelligible and that man has not only the potential but the vocation to discover its structure is also vital. I think we should remain strong in our convictions unless or until it dawns upon us that we were wrong. You know, the crucial distinction between hubris and wisdom is that a wise man will accept that he is wrong with gratitude. He is glad to have found an error in his ways because that brings him closer to the truth, whilst the prideful man will remain stubborn, contrary to his reason and his conscience. I would say that if you believe that your knowledge is absolute truth, then you are being exceedingly presumptuous, and it is actually highly likely that you are possessed by ideology. Like we said, the solution to this question doesn't lie in finally realizing that you hold absolute truth. It lies in realizing that you need to accept doubt, that the journey towards truth is a never-ending one. So, if instead of thinking that we could ever actually possess the whole and entire truth, if instead of that we understand that our knowledge is going to always be limited, and that we always have much, much more to learn, I think we will be saved from ideologies, at least in part. This brings us on to the next question that I want to address. How are we to know whether or not our beliefs correspond to a harmful ideology? I know I'm answering these questions backwards. I'm answering them in the opposite order to which I posed them, but that's just the order that I'm answering them. So I think that even the fact that you're asking this question and genuinely seeking out the truth means that you're part way to getting the answer. I think you can know partly whether or not your beliefs are based on a harmful ideology by simply realizing that you've asked the question, but only if the question is posed honestly. An emphasis on the partly because even that isn't enough. There's more to this, which I will come on to. Now I realize that this may seem obvious, but there were definitely times in my life where I was genuinely troubled by this question. And I think that the reason for that is because there are so many people today who will ostracize you if you hold beliefs which are in any way contrary to theirs. You know, cancel culture and all that. People will tell you with such conviction and seriousness that people who hold your viewpoint are a bigoted fascist or an idiot leftist snowflake, that you genuinely start to believe them. They tell you with such conviction, they are so serious about this, that you're thinking, am I a bigoted fascist? Am I an idiot? Well, I think that just by asking this question, the very fact that you're asking yourself this question is a good sign, but it isn't enough. And also, I think that worrying so much about the judgments and opinions of others isn't the best idea. I've come to realize that the only thing that truly matters is man's conscience before God. You needn't worry about the opinions of others, because if they truly reveal something, then your conscience would indicate that that was so. This isn't some excuse so that you can just stay in your own little bubble and not listen to anyone else, not listen to the opinions of others, not have true debates. What I'm saying is their opinions only really matter if they play on your conscience. But you must have that introspection, which is a prerequisite, which is part and parcel of your conscience. And like I said, it isn't enough just to have the humility to ask yourself this question, to ask yourself whether or not your beliefs correspond to a harmful ideology. There's more to this, and this is what I wanted to come on to. This is the second part of the answer to our question. So asking yourself whether or not your beliefs correspond to a harmful ideology indicates nothing more than that you are capable of consulting your reason on occasion. It says absolutely nothing about the general pattern of your actions. We can only know whether or not we are gripped by ideology if we truly know who we are, and it is paramount that we acknowledge that we don't fully know who we are. I made another video titled "You Don't Know Yourself as Well as You Think," which I'll put a link to down in the description, which goes into these ideas in more detail. But the relevant point here, the relevant point to this video, is that I had no idea just how deceitful and contemptible the majority of my actions were. Despite proclaiming consciously that my goal in life was to fulfill the will of God, or to discover the nature of the good and apply what I learned to my life, despite the fact that I consciously wanted to do these things, due to a serious lack of introspection, a serious lack of self-examination, I lied all the time. I tried to win arguments, even after realizing that I was wrong. I was a stubborn, prideful, and pretty much awful person. And still to this day, I do things like this, but at least I'm aware of it. And through this awareness, I've been able to fix a lot of these things and become a better person. So even though you might have considered whether or not what you believe in is correlated with a harmful ideology, and you've done that honestly, you need to go even deeper. There are many unconscious influences at play in our lives, so much so that if you were to somehow be able to remove your consciousness from your body, make that consciousness forget what you did over the past week, and then get that consciousness to watch back what you did over that past week, there's a chance that you, like myself, in the past, despite thinking that you're a good person, despite thinking that you don't do a lot of sinful things, despite thinking that you know yourself and that you know you're a good person, despite all this, it might just be so that the consciousness that we've removed from yourself would think, oh, this person is a terrible wretch, or this person is a lazy, useless sloth, or this person cares about absolutely no one except themselves, and so on. Of course, you'd have to make yourself forget what you look like as well, and a whole lot of other stuff, but this is just a theoretical situation. I'm not saying that you could actually do this or anything. You see, what you believe in is a tricky thing. Is it just what your conscious mind recognizes as rational and moral, or is it reflected in your actions? Because these two things can be quite different. However you choose to define belief, what truly matters are your actions. And so if you choose the first definition for belief, it is very possible that your beliefs will be incongruent with your actions. And if you do not examine your actions very, very carefully, and actually try to do what we did in that theoretical situation, obviously you can't actually do it, but try and detach yourself and separate yourself into two people one who acts, and one who judges. And then you'll find out a lot about who you really are. But if you don't do these things and attempt to reconcile your actions with that mindset of humbly seeking out the truth, then in this case, just asking yourself the question, am I gripped by ideology, is nowhere near enough. In this case, you really should be troubled by this question. So as we've established, I've answered these questions in the reverse order, but anyway, here we are. We're back to the first question. Why is it that so many people are gripped by ideology? There's an easy question, despite the fact that this is probably one of the most difficult questions to answer. I'm going to give my perspective. I'm going to explain how I understand it. So any given ideology will have contained within it a set of principles or assumptions about the underlying structure of reality. Now these may be implicit, they might not be explicitly stated by anyone who adheres to the ideology or anyone who formed the ideology, but regardless of whether they're stated or not, I believe they can be determined with careful thought. Allow me to give a few examples. So capitalism is defined by the Cambridge Dictionary as an economic and political system in which property, business, and industry are controlled by private owners rather than by the state with the purpose of making a profit. Now, what can we say about the true foundations which underlie this ideology? Well, how about this? So if you're an adherent of capitalist ideology, then you believe that the purpose of man in this world is to attain the greatest possible well-being, irrespective of the degree of suffering that it causes to others. Having established this relationship between man and the world, you believe that material wealth is the provider of this well-being. And so giving these assumptions about the structure of reality, you believe that every individual should be free to pursue material wealth and that each should be rewarded according to their ambition and their merit with, again, material wealth. Now perhaps you believe that, as Adam Smith, the great Scottish economist and philosopher, famously stated, that individual ambition serves the common good, and perhaps you believe that the aim of capitalism could be human well-being and not just personal well-being, and that the pursuits of capitalism don't disregard the suffering of others. To me, this just sounds like a rationalization to justify self-interest. But even if you really do believe that, you're still grounding the purpose of man as the achievement of the greatest possible well-being. Whether you believe that is achieved collectively or not, you're still believing that man's purpose is to attain it. Let's look at socialism now. So the definition of socialism given by the Cambridge Dictionary is the set of beliefs that states all people are equal and should share equally in a country's money, or the political systems based on these beliefs. Now this might sound entirely different to capitalism. It might sound completely antithetical to capitalism even. But let us do the same thing for socialism as we did for capitalism. So what are the assumptions about the underlying structure of reality that socialism makes? Well, if you're an adherent of socialism, you believe that the purpose of man is to attain the greatest possible well-being, irrespective of the degree of suffering which it causes to others. Having established this relationship between man and the world, you see material wealth as the provider of this well-being. We begin in the exact same manner, but from now it gets a little bit different. Instead of taking this reality and believing that the individual should be free to pursue material wealth, you believe that merit or ambition has absolutely nothing to do with its distribution and allocation. You believe that the inequality and poverty of our world could be solved by giving everyone an equal amount of material wealth. Now it sounds like on this occasion that it is much more likely that you believe that personal well-being is achieved collectively, and perhaps that is true. But it is also true that suggesting these types of ideas in a position of poverty could be motivated by pure self-interest. But regardless, that is not the point. The point is that according to this ideology, man's purpose is to attain the highest possible well-being, just like capitalism. And just like capitalism, socialism assumes that material wealth is the pathway to that well-being. I want to give one more example, and that being nationalism. So how does the Cambridge Dictionary define nationalism? A nation's wish and attempt to be politically independent. Alright, so the fundamental assumption about reality that this ideology makes is slightly different to that of capitalism and socialism. It states something along the lines of man's purpose does not lie in the attainment of the greatest possible personal well-being, but it lies in the attainment of the greatest well-being for a certain aggregate of people, i.e. a nation. This defines man's relationship to the universe slightly differently. We aren't made for personal well-being, but national well-being. Of course, there's a question of how is the greatest well-being achieved, and this would be akin to what capitalism and socialism would define as the manner in which we can achieve the greatest personal well-being, which would be material wealth. Well, nationalism could say that power is the key to national well-being, or it could suggest that material wealth is the key to national well-being, or, the expansion of the nation, the expansion to include other territories, anything like that. The how doesn't really matter. What I'm trying to emphasize here is the why. And this why can be viewed as distinct to, or as an extension of, the morality established by or adhered to by capitalism and socialism. The idea of meaning being found in personal well-being can be extended to the family, to the village, to the state, to the nation, can be extended to the whole of humanity, even. And as we said as well, adherents of capitalism or socialism can see the meaning of life to be found in collective well-being as well, and it can be at any of these levels. Okay, so you might not be able to see what all of this has got to do with why are so many people gripped by ideology. Allow me to try and bring it all together. So, what I've just discussed, the underlying principles about the structure of reality which these ideologies profess, are the religious assumptions underlying these three ideologies. The definition of religion is how man establishes his relationship to the infinite. And this is something that he must do unless he is to decide that everything is meaningless, or unless he wants to remain in his animal state and to not use his reason. And if someone is gripped by an ideology, as I phrased it, it would mean that their ultimate goal in life would be to unify their religious assumptions with that of the ideology. And what I've tried to demonstrate here is that all ideologies have pagan religious assumptions at their foundation. Now, it was in Leo Tolstoy's Religion and Morality that I first came across these ideas, and he defines pagan exactly as I have described it. The first primitive religions which emerged were pagan, and they were characterized by that definition of man's relationship to the infinite as being he is here to achieve the greatest possible well-being, whether that be personal or some collective group. Man's purpose is to achieve well-being. The answer, therefore, to why so many people are gripped by ideology is because they have stated that they have advanced and developed so much that they no longer need religion. But religion is not something that we can live without, as we've stated, unless we decide life is meaningless. And if we truly believed that life was meaningless, we would just kill ourselves. Or unless we remain in our animal state and refuse to use our reason. Unless we are just motivated by our impulses and desires constantly. But because man has faculties of reason, this just doesn't work. So, because religion isn't something we can live without, something has inevitably substituted for it. Their value system, which they say is without religion, is simply a regression to the primitive pagan religion or the social religion at any of the given levels. And they found an ideology which appeals to their definition of their existence. They found an ideology which aligns with this value system that they've created for themselves. And they're therefore hooked by it. The answer to this question lies in the decline of religion and the decline of the one true religion. Now, before you start telling me about all of the horrendous self-interest that was involved in all of the church religions which existed before the Enlightenment, before anyone decided that they were above religion, I actually completely agree that they weren't very different from those in our day. Maybe I shouldn't have used the word decline What I really mean is that people no longer fall for the lies and hypocrisy of church teachings, but instead they have turned to ideology. Many, many things have been left unsaid in this video, and in answering the questions that I posed in this video, I've actually introduced even more new ones. What is this one true religion that I speak of? What is the alternative, if any, to defining man's purpose as the achievement of the greatest possible well-being? Can we genuinely move beyond selfishness? Look out for upcoming videos where I attempt to address these questions, and hopefully they'll provide more insight into the questions that I attempted to address here, of which I only scratched the surface really. Particularly the question of, is it possible to know whether our knowledge is the truth and reflective of reality? Because for this particular question, there is a discussion which I believe will provide insight, but I want to leave that for another video because I don't want to just talk about the same things in two videos. I probably do that anyway, but in particular, I would really, really be doing that if I discussed those things in this video. So you'll have to wait for a different video for me to discuss more about that question. For now though, I really hope you enjoyed this video and found it valuable. And until next time, I thank you very much for watching, and God bless.